Ian Crowhurst, and welcome along to our little podcast. We're also videoing this too, so we might release this on our YouTube channel for the Institute for Learning and Performance. But firstly, just by way of introduction, tell us a bit about yourself, and then we'll go into what we want to cover in this particular podcast, which is all about the benefits of being in a membership organisation like ILP and what that serves.
So my name's Ian Crowhurst. I live in the Gold Coast, work mostly in Brisbane, but also travel to Sydney, Melbourne, sometimes Adelaide, but also Newcastle. My role is I head up talent and future capability for Origin Energy. And so what that involves is leading leadership development across the organisation, learning and development, talent succession and identification of talent, and also our reskilling and upskilling program called Future Directions as part of the energy transition. So I've got a team who are based geographically across Australia. And so therefore that keeps me pretty busy, as you can imagine. And then I'm also an advisory board member for the ILP as well.
Which is how, well, we're so fortunate enough to be able to get you along to have a chat to us. So I do appreciate your time, very valuable. So to get into why we wanted to have this discussion, ILP, about 40% of the membership is made up of organisation-based L&D professionals like yourself. So either working in low level or all the way to the most senior levels of L&D in their organisations. Tell me what the role is in for L&D in larger corporations now. Has it morphed over the last 10 years? And if so, what have you seen change in the I guess, the context of L&D in large organisations?
Well, I think there's a much bigger desire for L&D to help with change, and businesses are transforming in all different ways. So I take our business, we're transforming from carbon-based energy through to renewables. Other businesses have got, including ours, have also got AI interventions and trying to sort of deal with actually how people learn AI and what's already there and what sort of skills they need to be able to manage that and foster that, but equally add benefit to their business. And so I just take those couple of examples because learning and development have a part to play in all of those, from reskilling and upskilling people from roles, careers, jobs that perhaps are declining or no longer exist in the future, and reskilling them into jobs which might require more people to be in those roles. And so therefore, how do we sort of move people from careers from one to the other by providing learning development solutions? So I think there's a big role in terms of change and transition, regardless of the business. I think everybody has that, but it's in different sort of formats. And L&D need to be around the table to be able to support that. Number one, in terms of a strategy as to how each business is going to manage that, and working with leadership teams, signing off strategies, and then also going through from design and implementation, and then an element of evaluation, and focusing on how that transition works. So I think if I was to sum it up in total, I would say like the overarching piece is about sort of L&D playing a big part within change and making that happen.
The circles within which you operate, just the feedback you might get from other L&D professionals at your level, would you say that L&D is getting more or less of an ear at the boardroom or at the senior executive level now?
I mean, I think that depends on the organisation, the relationships you've got, because actually people have different relationships and different ways of operating. But I felt like it's, at the beginning, L&D had a big part around the table. There was maybe a bit of a lull at some point, but I feel like actually with the amount of change and transition and the importance of capability and skills and reducing costs, because, you know, one of the prime examples of L&D in careers is actually growing your own talent. And recruiting people is usually at a higher cost. I feel like L&D is round the table, or should be round the table in your organisation, to be able to make sure that they hear it from actually the team themselves and be involved in the decision making and the strategy to be able to implement those. So I feel like if an organisation is doing it well, there is representation around the table with the right decision makers.
Yeah, and I'm probably going to speak from an opinion base now, but I think the requirement for someone to listen, like a senior executive, to listen to the needs of the people, and also tie that back to the strategy of the organisation. I can't imagine a business operating without that connection, So it's got to be, I think. So that brings me to, I guess, why we're involved. So what's the appeal of an organisation like the Institute for Learning and Performance for people in corporate learning and development roles at the moment? What would be some of the appeals that even maybe you've witnessed yourself over the last couple of years you've been involved with us?
I think actually having a professional community to draw upon is a big benefit in a number of things. So I take a couple of examples that I've utilised before, and that's about actually sometimes we need to source vendors for things. And sometimes you design or implement things in-house, but also equally sometimes you need some external expertise in a specific area, or you want to add a little bit more creativity to something. And therefore I've used the ILP particularly to source vendors or suppliers to be able to have some creative thinking or design something, or maybe run a workshop. It could be as simple as that. And so therefore the ILP has a great community that you can draw upon. For accessing the portal, which I won't go into all the details about, but there is a portal that, has details of people and their businesses and what the expertise they provide. And tapping into something like that actually saves sometimes a lot of time and effort. And, they're sort of part of the professional membership as well. So I feel like that's something you can tap into. Secondly, there's key events, as you would probably expect. So key events on particular topics, or whether they're masterclasses or whether they're just sharing exercises. You can get advice and support and different perspectives just from your colleagues from those discussions, or even from an expert if it's something which is organised more centrally. So I think there's a couple of examples. The last example I would give is there's also sometimes social nights, so building a network and connection. I think sometimes, particularly those people who run their own business, it can be quite isolating for people sometimes if they don't have a big team around them, which small businesses don't tend to have. If you're in corporate, it might be slightly different because you've got quite a big network around you within the business, but actually having other colleagues in similar roles in different organizations or similar organizations is really great for building those relationships and networks, and having colleagues who can just bounce ideas off and get some ideas and perspectives.
I love that, because it's probably the most underrated part is that social aspect and the things you pick up when you're in a social surrounding. We've had some members on our Learning Lounge on Fridays who are corporate L&D, but they're new. So they're just new in that particular corporate L&D role. And yes, they have staff and managers and people around them, but they still feel isolated. They don't know what they don't know. And so having that outlet, whether it's a formal outlet like a conference or something like that, or it's just a social outlet like going to the networking functions, they can just shoot the breeze, so to speak, and say, look, I'm doing this, or I'm feeling that. What did you do in the past? Is that something as I said, you're quite senior now, so looking back over your career, or maybe people who you've seen come through in those roles, what benefit would it be to them? So the newer or the younger, and I don't mean to say you're not young, but the younger version.
Not really.
The younger version of yourself maybe coming through the ranks.
Just for gathering expertise of others. So, there's also a mentoring program that you can participate in. And so therefore that's, somebody imparting their knowledge or their skills and experience of potentially doing something similar or the same as what somebody's done before. You can tap into those types of things. But just sort of seeing how people behave or how they tackle things, or having a different perspective on something, particularly when you're new to either the industry or a role, or you're perhaps more junior. Those are particularly beneficial for you to decide, actually, I'm going to take this part of what somebody's taught me or learned or I've seen, and maybe there's bits that I won't take, but I learn through that, and actually I then sort of craft my own sort of way of operating in that organization or within my own business. So I feel like it really sort of gets a different perspective and opens your eyes up to other things that are out there.
The ILP have a thing called the capability framework, and very recently a new assessment has now been plugged into our member portal. So that means people like yourself can then go in there and just undertake quite a simple, I think it's about a 10-minute assessment to focus on your strengths and pick up any gaps in your knowledge around that particular capability framework. Is that something that you think people, especially the younger ones or even more senior ones in corporate L&D, could make use of and actually benefit from?
Oh, look, I think that's a great opportunity to benchmark yourself against something and help inform your development plan. And us people in L&D should be role modeling development plans and learning and, on-the-job learning versus maybe something a bit more structured and formal, etc. So wouldn't that be great to be able to just sort of fill in a few questions honestly and get some feedback as to where actually your strengths are and where the opportunities lie based on the skills of a professional L&D person. And I know there's a lot of research that's gone into the back of that in order to formulate that matrix. So I feel like actually it'd be a great opportunity just to see where you lie and then think about how do I want to go about using some of that. And I'm a great believer in not doing everything, but just sort of identifying a couple of areas or a couple of actions, do those really well, and then maybe move on to something else.
Yeah, I appreciate that. When I did it myself, I jumped at the chance to, when it was first released, obviously to trial it and see what it was like. This is when we had the old version of the questionnaire. Now I've redone the new one, and it came out strangely enough with exactly the same result. I'm still very bad at evaluation, but
you can do your actions.
Yeah, but it's so good. I know since doing the first one, I've now run evaluation courses. I've dived in with Will Thalheimer and learned more about the L-term model. So it has really sparked. This is someone who's been doing it for 20 years. Still has something to learn. And I love what you said. We've got to role model it. If we're in L&D, why aren't we learning? We should be enrolled in something all the time. It doesn't matter what it is. There should be something we're learning on the side.
Yeah, and that doesn't have to be a course. Like we always talk about courses and workshops and things, but it could be just something quite simple, or it could be, professional development slightly outside of L&D that's complementary. It could be anything like that, really.
Yeah, something that I have picked up on more so recently, now that we've moved across the new Certificate 4 to a different learning platform, all the individual parts of that particular qualification now are you can undertake as non-accredited training. So you can enroll in it, so to speak, but you don't have to treat it like it's accredited. So you don't have to do the assessment. You can just literally learn from it. And some of those are, or all of them actually, are very much aligned to that capability framework. And one that came up just the other day, there's a student doing it, and she is actually a corporate, quite young, but she did the project management unit at first and got her 2 projects put aside. One was NDIS related, and the other one was nothing to do with that. It's a very, very diverse projects that she wants to run and create L&D for. And she was buzzing. She said, this is just amazing to put things down on paper that have been buzzing around in my head for ages. And I've learned the basic skill of project management now just by doing one unit.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
And I love that feedback. So that, as you said, it doesn't have to be a formal course, but you can go and just undertake something that's going to help you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And sometimes you don't also know your blind spots. Like actually, we always talk about evaluation, particularly everybody talks about evaluation, and there's different methods of doing that. There's times where you might want to do that versus when you might not want to do that. And so therefore just having a perspective of all the different sort of options and so on is actually really good for when you actually do need it and deciding what sort of action you want to take.
So I'm going to imagine you now on stage with 1,000 people watching in a big conference somewhere, and you're just finishing up a conversation with us, and we're going to ask you this question. So this is going to be you talking to the 1,000 people.
Right.
What is the one piece of advice what's the one piece of advice you would give these 1,000 people who are considering where they should put their time and resources for advancing their own L&D careers?
Put their time and resources. I think for me, there are two big things. One, being really clear around what role you want to do in the future. And I'm not talking about the next role. I'm talking about sort of end game role.
Okay.
So I think a lot of people in sort of succession planning think about, the next role I'm going to do, I'm going to have a plan to get there. I'm going to craft that plan. I'm going to implement a few things and then apply for a job or be successful in succession for that job. The one piece of career advice I give sometimes people, maybe mentees, or mostly mentees actually, is that if you think about the end game role that you want to do, which could be pretty senior or it could be pretty complex, and work backwards, you're more likely to succeed. And you can really think about sort of mapping that out in terms of the journey to get to that end game role. And the different roles and opportunities or broadening steps you might want to do, and then thinking about the actions or the experiences you need to have done. So that would be my first one, is spend a bit of time, invest in thinking that through, being confident and clear as to what you want that to be, and then spending some time and effort to map that out.
I love that. I love that, looking at the end game first and working backwards, and then actually using that to formulate your plan rather than try to formulate a plan to get to it, because exactly. you don't know where the branches could end.
Yeah. Could you go to the next role and you think, oh, well, what am I going to do next? And then you actually, that might not have been the best role to get you to your final role or whatever that might be. Okay. So that was my first one. Do I have a second one?
Well,
no, I probably do. I don't know if I have a second one.
So no, that's both time and resources, isn't it? So you obviously you're going to have to put some time aside to think about what that role is going to be.
Yes,
and then
be confident, and maybe you might do some research as to what that role is, or you might do some informative interviews for somebody who's in that role to determine is that exactly what I think it's like versus what I perceive it to be like. So you might want to. There could be quite a lot of investment in that, depending on how deep you want to go.
Yeah, true. Do you believe that people need to achieve mastery, so a mastery level of competence in their end goal? Does that give them that satisfaction and motivation to keep going, or are people that you know very happy with kind of an intermediate level of competence around that role?
I think it depends on what your team is like when they are around you. So actually, you don't have to be mastery in that role if your team have the expertise to do that. But equally, there might be times where you want to just probe and ask the right questions through coaching, for example. So I don't think it's necessary. I think it's just dependent on what sort of team you build around you.
Yeah, I like that, because sometimes it's not the skills of that particular role that you're after. It's maybe the leadership skills.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Ian, on that note, I've kept it quite short this week because I know you're busy, but I really want to thank you so much for actually giving us this time and your time. The corporate L&D membership to ILP is something that we're really proud of, and we really want to continue to grow. And people like yourself sharing these insights with others is really, really beneficial. So we appreciate your time. Thank you so much. For all those people who are out there who would like to find out more, just click on the links that we're going to have associated with either the podcast or the video, and any posts we have, of course. But yeah, follow along. This is a continuous journey, and I'm a huge believer in that good old concept of lifelong learning. We never stop, and people in L&D, as Ian rightly said, we have to be the role models. So thank you again, Ian Crowhurst.
Thank you. See ya.